There we go. Hi, I'm Eileen, and I have with me here today Ben Oofana. Ben is an author, writer, gifted healer. He's a friend and mentor, uh, and one of the most empathetic and sensitive people that I know. Ben trained with one of the last surviving doctors of the Kiowa Native American tribe, Horace Dukkai. And he also trained with Chinese master Shifu Liang in the internal arts of Baguazhang and and uh, help me on this one. It's
Xin Yi Quan,
Xin Yi Quan.
uh,
Thank thank
Gong Tai Chi.
you. So today we're going to explore um, your training, your capacity as a healer, um, people's expectation and the healing process, and peppered with my stories of my work with you for the last decade around those questions. So welcome.
Thank you. Mhm.
Um, I always like to start with my story of how I came to work with you. I was in my later 40s and going through menopause, going through the midlife crisis, going through health crises. And for my 50th birthday, I was going to do something for myself. So I was looking for something, a healer, a workshop to do special for that 50th birthday. And nothing really settled in, right?
Mhm.
Until I heard you on a podcast. Uh,
Mm.
and I heard your voice, and your voice was so clear. And it not in the way it sounded, although it is clear when you speak, but it was an internal clear that I could hear that you were, had done work. You were clear inside, and I felt like such a mess. I wanted I wanted that. I wanted to feel clear like that. And
Mhm.
I had called you up. Uh, you were working in New York City, which you still do, and got on the bus and went down for session.
Mhm.
And it was what started out to be, it was supposed to just be a one-time gift for myself. Here we are. In March, it'll be a decade later. And
Wow.
and it's a testament being on this side of the camera, um, because I couldn't have done so without all of those healing sessions. So there's a lot of appreciation for your being here today and
Mhm.
having been a part of making this happen for me. Um, I want to start with another, also a little story, and then then I'll let you speak. Um, uh, so about a year before I started working with you, I was utilizing an energy healer, and in one of those sessions, there was this, I had one of these spontaneous awakening experiences that was incredibly expansive. It was beautiful. It was, I felt love everywhere and peace and everything was beautiful and happy. But the experience was extremely destabilizing.
Mm.
I didn't know where the edges of me were. I didn't know what this was or what was happening to me. And the and this was in the days before Google. It was before the internet. So I couldn't Google and find information. I live very rurally, so the libraries didn't have that kind of capacity for books. And the healer, when I asked what's going on? What can you do for me? I feel really destabilized and ungrounded and um, he he couldn't respond. He didn't know what to do. He was kind of blown away by what happened. It wasn't a planned thing. And he couldn't offer any practices. He couldn't offer any ability to titrate that situation.
mm,
And fast forward to, um, it was after about a year that I knew I needed to find somebody different. And that's when we began engaging in sessions. And I think one of the first, um, the first session with you was extremely expansive as well. There was a lot of other things going on, a lot of internal work happening as well. But when we engaged on the phone afterwards, there was that ability in you to kind of titrate the situation, to
mm,
kind of, um, y- you know, like I don't want to say level it out, but just make it more bearable and more understandable. And the practices that you teach um, were a vital part of that as well. So um, let's head off in your training.
That'd be a good thing to address before we go into the training, and that it's inevitable that as I work with people doing any very intensive, deep level healing work, what's going to happen is, the fact that people carry this emotional wounding, these traumas that often go, far back, adolescence, childhood, even in utero. And and these deep emotional wounds are going to make their way to the surface. And there will be, in addition to that, your body's going through this process is, is a lot of the emotions, the memories are coming up. Sometimes it could feel expansive, but what I find is that people don't necessarily have the internal resources to process a lot of what's coming up. And so even if people do certain practices like Kundalini, pranayama type practices, and it could precipitate these releases, and yet there's not really the means with which to cope effectively with that. And and so there's both, and it depends on the person and the situation. And so I have to tune into each individual. It's like, okay, what's going on here? And in some instances, I sense like, okay, here are some specific practices you can do that, like the fact that I work with a lot of people with histories of trauma of one form or another, and some are very destabilized initially, sometimes hugely dissociated, easily overwhelmed. And so, one of the things, or two things I would have people do. One, sometimes I'd have them do walking meditation. And and there were times where even after the session, I just go out, go to wherever they're at, muting, and just go take them out and do it because I want to make sure they're coping with it, that they're able to process what's coming up. And there's also another practice where I just have people become permeable and diffuse that intensity of memory and emotion, that surfacing. So there's a specific practice for that. The fact that I had to heal my own traumatic wounding from the past and also working with so many people over the years, and everything imaginable comes at me. And so it's like, okay, how do we address this?
Mm,
And so being very intuitive, I would come up with workable, and maybe it's just internal guidance or some other presence just has given me these, sharing with me these insights. But so I have to need to be able to adapt to each individual with whom I work to provide a means to navigate the inner realms and just dealing with the realities of day-to-day life and everything more effectively. So you're going to ask about the my background?
Yeah, well, that led into um, something else. I think that a lot of people these days are, are off looking for the plant medicine experience, like looking for the big expansive experience. And what was really like, it was kind of surprising to me that even though I had that experience,
Mhm.
all of my trauma wounding was still there.
Mhm.
That experience did a few things, but all of me, all of my stuff was still there. And our work over the last 10 years has been a beautiful, you know, unfolding and working through and repatterning what's happened through your numerous practices. So it's not just like you said, you don't have just one or two go-to things. The healing sessions are individualized to
Mhm.
what each person needs and what each person experiences, which is phenomenal.
But there's also the fact that I work as a conduit, and a lot of people have no comprehension of this in our modern day world here. But the traditional Native American doctors all served as conduits, and so they're you know first in our training we'd apprentice with a older mentor, and these traditional doctors toward the end of their life would take on one or a few apprentices and be passing on the gifts or healing powers that they possessed. And then they'd have you go on the vision quest where you fast the 4 days and nights without food and water to earn the right to work with these gifts of healing. But the different doctors possess different kinds of powers, different gifts of healing. And they were highly specialized. Some had gifts that were more specific for, say, neurological disorders, other digestive or respiratory. So it's addressing a wide range of conditions, but tending to be very specific towards specific health related issues. And in my case, the fact that two things, there's very few people working on this level at this time in history. And so the fact that I've gone through so many of the vision quests, that 4 days and nights fasting alone without food and water in the mountains, I would continue to receive more as I would keep going back to the mountain. And the other
I'm
thing
going to
too, the
press
fact
you.
uh,
I'm going to press you here in this moment. How many vision quests have you been on?
61.
Okay. And that's where um, you earn the rights to work with the forces you do work with.
Yeah, and also the fact that I had two things. I had to heal my own traumatic wounding, the wounding from the traumas of my own childhood and adolescence. And even as those deep emotional wounds were healing, there was this profound sense that I had within me of, wow, I'm evolving. I'm becoming more of me. I'm more present, more engaged, more alive. I want more of this. And in some ways, it's very hard for me to comprehend how a lot of people operate. There's a certain aspect that's hard for me to comprehend and that's the part where you have a lot of people, they just want to get comfortable. It's like, they show up for healing at when they're in the midst of crises. But when the crisis blows over, it's like, okay, it's cool now. I'm done. And they want to get to that place of comfort. And it's like, I'm like, what?
Mm,
Because you cannot sit still for very long. Either you're sliding into stagnation are you healing, growing, you're evolving. So if you're not taking active steps consistently on a daily basis, maybe you don't do intervention on a daily basis, but you at least do practice on a daily basis and you do consistent intervention, whether monthly or at least every couple of months, and you do consistent practice and intervention, and it facilitates this continual forward growth, this evolution. And so that's a big part of the reason that I've continued to go. Now, despite the expense and all the effort, and it's not easy getting through those 4 days and nights without food and water, but
Yeah, to let people know, I mean, if you look up on Wikipedia, it says you can only live 3 days without water, and you go 4 days and 4 nights without food and water in
mhm,
very harsh conditions out
mhm,
there in the Wichita Mountains. So it's really quite an effort you put in there.
the wind and rain and thunder and lightning and
Mm.
sometimes just heat. When I was there in October and we're having unseasonably warm temperatures that got up to 92 degrees and
Wow. Wow.
not much in terms of shade up there and getting sunburned and getting buried under 6 to 8 inches of snow another time. And one time when temperature was dropping down into the teens and
Oh my
hovered
goodness.
in the teens for what, 3 days and felt kind of warm once it got up into the 30s. But finally, I think on the fourth day. But it's not to try to brag or to impress anyone. I don't care about that. It's native elders would say if you want something really good, you need to be willing to make a sacrifice.
This isn't it's not a bragging, and if I'm putting you on the spot a little bit, I
Mhm.
apologize. But
No, not at all.
this is to distinguish you because everybody, you know, now, like Reiki used to be years ago, everyone's taking a shaman workshop and is a shaman.
Mhm.
And so my asking these pointed things to you is a distinguishing factor. And this separates you. This separates your capacity as a healer. This
Mhm.
separates you um, in ways that all of the rest of whatever's out there um, is. And it's certainly not meant to put you in a bragging position,
Mhm.
but to uphold those ancient uh, the dedication to those ancient practices that you have. Uh,
Sometimes I find it incredibly disheartening because you have, for instance, people going through 3 weekend workshops and assuming the title of master healer and it's so cheapens the it so trivializes and that's much of what happens with the whole new agey thing is that it's some of these things like Reiki, for instance, is to healing what McDonald's and Burger King is to food. It just so
yeah, I've heard of stuff
trivializes.
like that.
It's like, there's, for instance, when people claim to be Reiki masters or whatever, and it's like, okay, look, say you need to see a dentist, or you require the intervention of a surgeon, and how would you feel if you found out that supposed surgeon or dentist had 3 weekends of training? And it's not my intention to discredit or put anyone or anything down. I want to establish levels of credibility and capability and competence. There needs to be standards in all these different professions, whether it's law, accounting, medicine. There are standards, and one goes through intensive, how all this years of you know, education and examinations and licensing and all this to determine that you have the knowledge and you have the capacities to function on, within those specific fields. And what a lot of people fail to understand, and a lot of that is largely because we do not have intact traditions of healers and people of other spiritual traditions. Like if you go to, you know, say in Tibet, and I know in India and the Hindu Vedic tradition, and a lot of that has also gotten watered down. You see, like you go back 80 or more years, and you had these individuals who devoted their lives to this very hardcore aesthetic lifestyle practice, hours of intensive daily practice discipline. And you'd have many develop these extraordinary gifts and capabilities, often far beyond what many people even consider to be humanly possible.
Mhm.
And you would have individuals, yogis, gurus that, and they had a following, but it wasn't like this massive, like hundreds or thousands of people turning up at their events and it being a big circus. It was actually, there were quite a few individuals who operated on these levels who possessed these capacities. And people would show up when they would have their discourses, and these individuals would sometimes work with people individually or, in groups. They would take people through meditation practice. But there's more of a seriousness, a reverence. They would show up and they would do intensive practice, and those students, those devotees that really excelled, they would move closer to the guru, and there would be more personalized, individualized instruction, but there wasn't all this like um, again, what I refer to as a circus, like you see some of the gurus that are touring the United States and Europe, and for me too, the fact that I trained with the master from China. And in that case, there's less likely to be that the circus, because when you get in there, there's actually a lot of hard work and very strenuous, intensive training that you go through. And most people are just too lazy for that. They're not going to work that hard.
Mm.
And so you have different levels there as well. You'll have people that show up to the classes with the whole group of people. And of course, me, I have to always take it to the next level. I want to get as close then to the master as possible and advance as far as I can in my own training. So what do? I go train with the master one-on-one. And by doing that, there's a lot of additional practices, internal practices through which you develop the inner power that is not going to show that to the big group of people who show up in his general classes. So no, I go work with them individually. By doing that, he's going to share with me more of these practices that are usually passed down in secret. And also the like if I was just doing the classes, okay, he would show me the different forms, fighting forms and stuff, maybe show me some applications. But by working with him one-on-one, he would show me a lot more of the specific applications that if you're ever in a situation where you have to defend yourself,
Mm,
you're on the street and someone attacks you. It's like, well, what can you do to disable that person,
mm,
cause them some serious pain so they'll think twice about ever doing that to someone again, if they're even capable of doing that to someone again after you're done with them.
mm. So are in your healing sessions, or is there, do you use combinations of what you learned from both of your teachers? Or does it depend on um, the person you're working with? Or do you strictly bring in the Native American side? Like, what's going on in your sessions in terms of your training? Like,
My mentor, Horace, as I said, he transmitted portions of his own healing gifts to me, and then he'd have me fast without the food and water on the vision quest. And then he would have me assist him as he was working with some of his patients. And there's one aspect of the work that I haven't continued, and a number of the traditional doctors are not doing this because there's some risk involved, and that they would use the suction. And traditionally, they would sometimes just applying, the mouth or maybe the end of a buffalo horn, and they would extract, like say if someone was suffering from pneumonia, if someone had blood clots, and they could extract fluid from the body. But with the event of HIV, AIDS,
mm,
there's you're putting yourself at risk. And also people taking all these medications, which are fairly highly concentrated and
yeah.
risk of getting some of that into your body. And so now, as I work with people, it's like, okay, well, maybe every once in a while somebody might feel quite nauseous and vomit or something, or it might come out through diarrhea. Most people are not going to do that, but occasionally, but it's just a purging if that does happen.
Mhm.
It's a very deep, powerful internal cleansing or purging process that happens as I work with people. And but during the individual sessions, well, let me back up again. My mentor, after as he had me assisting people, there is one point too, and I know I'm jumping back and forth. He had me assisting him, and there's this man who was injured in an accident when I think a front end loader or bulldozer or something turned over and he was pinned underneath, and it left him paralyzed from the waist down.
Mm.
And so he has me assisting him in doing that suction. And when I did that, literally blood clots came out of the back of his leg.
Wow.
And I'm just like, like staring in disbelief. And it's like, and forgive me if my language offends anyone, but part of me is like, holy fuck, this shit actually works. And seeing the the blood clots come out of the back of this guy's leg, and my mentor, he took a toothpick and he's like, just kind of stabbing or picking up the blood clots, um, and it was gelatinous clumps of blood. And but again, that part I discontinued, the risk of HIV AIDS, which, right as the time that I was training, right before I started my apprenticeship, that's when all of a sudden you're hearing of the news reports. That's when they were beginning to come out about people contracting AIDS. And it was at that time spreading rapidly, especially among the gay male community.
Mm,
And during the time I was apprenticing with my mentor, I was staying out for much of the time on the Navajo Indian reservation. So I was not hearing or watching the news. I was pretty isolated in ways, and I didn't hear about the HIV AIDS so much during that time, not till I came back into mainstream culture. But and after apprenticing with my mentor, I put myself back into college. I needed time to put my head back together after that, all that intensity of the apprenticeship. I mean, he had me do all kinds of intense stuff. Like at one point, he gave me $30 cash and he dropped me off in the middle of the Hopi Indian reservation. And my instruction was to hitchhike to Las Vegas, Nevada. And he said, make it the best you can. He wanted to teach me to rely on my instinct in order to survive. But
oh my
then
goodness. How many miles was that?
I don't, probably a couple hundred, I'm guessing,
Oh my goodness. So you had to survive out there on your own
in Vegas. Yeah.
with just what were you drinking out there? Like,
No, this
how
is
did that?
Las Vegas, where he let me off in the middle of the Hopi reservation and had me hitchhike to Vegas,
Okay.
Las Vegas, Nevada, and survive in that urban context. But it was
Oh, okay, okay.
very scary,
Yeah.
a terrifying experience because it was in the middle of winter and all the homeless people, are like heading down, you know, coming down from the north in droves to escape the cold in the northern states, and they all congregate in cities like Vegas where it's warm, and so I had to use my instincts to survive.
Wow.
I
Because you were in your early 20s at
I
this
was
point,
20
right?
at that time.
Yeah. So you
Yeah, so I
still a
just
kid.
very instinctively, I don't want to go too much into depth because it'll take too much time, but I just started calling churches and just I knew what to say, having grown up in evangelical background. I knew what to say, and I ended up getting put up for a while until I could find work and find a place on my own to live. And then Horace showed up a few months later and said, "Ready to go?" And we were back on the road. But
Wow.
anyway, so at one point, as I was training with Horace, he just says, and he could sense my hesitancy to to work on my own. And he was saying, I cannot show you everything that you need to do. I've shown you the basics. I've had you assist me. I've transmitted this power, these healing gifts to you. So at this point, it's up to you. You actually need to just go in with what you have, work with what you have, because I cannot show you everything. This is going to work differently for you than it does for me. It's going to reveal itself to you. So therefore, you need to get in and just start working with people. And like I said, I was still hesitant, not making that much effort. There were a few individuals when I put myself back into college, I needed that time to put my head back together after training a couple of years with Horace. And some of the individuals I spoke with, and they're like, "Oh, will you help me with this? Will you help me with that?" And I'm like, well, I'll try." And I remember one instance where there was a couple that I was friends with, and the girlfriend broke her ankle, and I was closer with the boyfriend, but he was talking about it, and I said, "Yeah, I'll see what I can do for her." And he was very clairvoyant, clairaudient. He had some gifts himself, and so he was sitting in the room as I worked with her, and he we, we both attended this meditation group, and I was very shy, very quiet, introverted at the time, didn't speak much. And everyone else in the group was at least 10, 15, 20, 30 years older than me. And they were a little condescending. It's like, oh, the cute college kid. And and so this man, Robert, as I was working with his girlfriend, and he started speaking in the group after I worked with her. It was so funny because it was like he said, I want to share something with you. Like he was just totally blown away. He said, he described how I started working with his girlfriend. He said this profound force. He felt this, it's like this column of power just slammed down, came down vertically, and then it went out horizontally and it filled the whole room. And he said the power was so intense that he said it felt like it was pushing him back in his chair. He said it was all he could do to keep his eyes open. And he was describing feeling that presence or force working with his girlfriend, facilitating the healing of her ankle. And there was this dead silence in the group, like, and you could feel the like this kind of oh shit and this embarrassment.
Oh
Like
my goodness.
we've been like because people were reflecting on like how their kind of attitude or the way they had interacted with me, and that I just had not let on at all. And people were responding to me completely differently afterwards. So,
Wow.
but over time, as I began to work with people, initially my understanding was very limited. And in the beginning, of course, I just didn't know as much. I didn't have as much insight or understanding as far as what I was working with or dealing with. But over the years, what happened is people would be coming to me with this wide range of all kinds of things like digestive, respiratory disorders, people that suffered stroke and heart disease and uh, MS, Lou Gehrig's disease, other neurological disorders, wide range, physical, emotional, childhood sexual trauma. I remember the first time was I never really had any. I mean, we all know people who were sexually abused as children because it's sadly it's very prevalent. I think it's something like one out of every four females, and for males, I don't know if it's one out of five, one out of six. It's less frequent for males, but more so for females. And so I'm allergic to bee stings, and I was at a friend's house and was barefoot one summer and got stung, and my foot was badly swollen. I went to this clinic where they sell medicinal herbs and uh, is run by a neurologist, and the woman who was working as his receptionist, I was talking with her and I mentioned what I did. She said, I want to try that. It's like, okay. And so I go uh, to her home, and as we're doing the session, and she's recovering the memories of being molested and as well as the brutal physical assault that she suffered, multiple physical beatings, physical assaults. And she had gone through a decade of psychotherapy, and yet there was years of her life she had no recollection. It was completely blacked out. She could not access the memories at all. The first session, it's all coming back.
Wow.
And her therapist was blown away. I mean, he actually ended up doing a number of sessions. And and I continued to work with her for quite a few years, up until, well, I moved out of Kansas City. But even after, I'd go back and visit Kansas City, and I'd work with her when I'd go back into town. And that over the time, as I was working with her, that sexual trauma healed. But again, there's such a wide range of health related issues, uh, trauma, other emotional wounding, anxiety, depression, people going through breakup and divorce, patterns of abandonment and unrequited love, just wide range of just everything imaginable.
Sounds like you have all the bases covered that
No, not
people.
all. There are some things that I cannot work with. There's no modality that's going to address every issue. And when that's the case, then I refer people if there's something else. For instance, if somebody contracts Lyme or some of these other tick-borne diseases, what I work with, that power that works through me will not kill off another life form. So in these instances, something like, the rifle machine, for instance, would kill off that spirochete. And, that's responsible for the Lyme. And then there's other supplements or medicinal herbs that help to decrease, you know, kill off or beat back the Lyme. On the other
Perhaps.
hand, there's a lot of the damage resulting from the Lyme that the individual sessions will mitigate that damage and will do a lot of repair, restorative work, but they need other means to actually kill off the pathogen itself. And see, that's where a lot of Native Americans ran into trouble, where you had when Europeans came over, and because Native Americans did not have domesticated animals other than the dog in North America, the llama and the alpaca in South America, without the domesticated animals, they didn't develop the immunity to infectious diseases that Europeans and Africans and Asians and Middle Easterners had. And so they were far more susceptible. And so Native Americans, um, a large percentage of their population was obliterated by smallpox,
Yeah.
cholera, measles. And so every modality, every form of healing, there's a range of what it can do, but every modality form of healing also has its limitations. But anyway, again, getting back to your question earlier, each person I work with, over the years, there many people are coming to me with digestive issues. And over time, as I was working with these individuals, I was recognizing certain commonalities. I started developing a system of meditation practices. And it's similar to some of the Buddhist mindfulness practices, but in some respects, it goes far deeper as I take people down into the emotional wounding, diving into the depths of their emotions, working with the traumatic experiences that they have suffered, getting them deep into the internal organs. And but I initially started doing these practices, I instinctively fell into it as the traumas of my own childhood and adolescence began to surface in my mid-20s. But as I was working with people and they had all these widely diverging needs and being intuitive, it's like, well, how do I adapt this practice to their needs? And so over the years, I developed a wide range of applications for all these different health related issues, the different kinds of emotional wounding, the different challenges or struggles people face in their lives. So the range of the practices that I teach, it's continued to grow. And just some people who study astrology, who looked at my chart, have described that I have a lot of water elements. And so there's this mutability, this fluidity, adaptability. So I just have this natural ability to adapt to people and their needs, to be part of it's being very empathetic. You mentioned being sensitive. So to be able to intuitively, empathetically step into another person to just feel what they're going through and what their needs are. And
Mm,
so I adapt myself and my approach to each individual with whom I work. And then addition, being a conduit, as I said, the traditional Native American doctors and other indigenous healers from other indigenous groups of people, we all act as conduits. And so there's different forces, different beings that work through me according to what the individual I'm working with at any given time and what their specific needs are. So even the same individual, sometimes they'll describe like a different presence coming through to help them address specific issues when they come up.
mm. I can definitely attest to that over the years. Sessions have been different, very different.
Hmm.
I feel, different experiences, sometimes feeling like you're at one end of my body, but you're really at the other end, and feeling hands and feeling presences and power. Lots of different things over the years, depending on what we were working with. Um, yeah,
A
and
lot of
I
people.
yeah, I wanted to also bring up, I did have Lyme disease, and our session work through that was very helpful for boosting the immune system.
Hmm.
It 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 really helped me get through that period, which was horrible. Lyme disease is terrible. Um, so even though the sessions didn't kill the pathogens, the other herbals that I was working with did, but the sessions were so supportive for the rest of what was going on in my body and my mind with that disease.
Let me jump in right here with that because, as I said, when I was beginning, I had to figure a lot of things out on my own. And we all make mistakes. And sometimes it's just lack of understanding. And so there's an individual that I was working with, and there was nothing done. When I say mistake, there was nothing done in terms of causing any sort of harm. But I'd gotten to be friends with them too, someone I really cared about. And I'm straight, very straight and heterosexual, all that. But I got to know, when I graduated from college, soon thereafter, I ended up living in Kansas City and for a few years. And so I ended up, as I was resurfacing in mainstream American culture, There were quite a few individuals, especially among the gay male community, that I ended up working with. And at that time, we didn't have the antiretroviral drugs. They didn't come out till, sadly, a few years later. And there are many people, like Freddie Mercury or Queen, for instance. Had those drugs come out sooner, there are a lot of people that could still be alive. And so I worked with this man that I worked with, one of the men, his name was Robert. And as the AIDS, HIV AIDS virus was progressing, it was taking its toll and he was really going down. And I did a session for him at one point in there, and he came back up. It was just he was with some mutual friends, and I saw him get out of the back of their SUV, and it just brought him back up. It was like a dramatic difference, but I think about like 27, 28 at the time, and I hadn't been working that long. And I just didn't have as much insight or understanding, as much knowledge as I do now. And then I moved out of Kansas City, because I wanted to be back in the Southwest, went back to New Mexico. And it wasn't that long after I moved out of Kansas City that Robert died.
Uh,
And as I look back, I would say that's one of the greatest mistakes of my career. And I call it a mistake. It's just, I just didn't know. I didn't have that guidance. I didn't have any peers to trade notes with, or I didn't have anyone that I could go to and say, hey, keep working with them. Knowing what I know now, I would have said, look, let's just keep doing these sessions. Because I've had people who would with cancer, like bone marrow cancer, and for instance, one woman that I worked with, and she was given what 2 to 3 years to live, and we were doing the sessions, and even that was challenging because it was also in Kansas City. But by that time, I was in New Mexico, then I started traveling to the East Coast, and I could only get back to Kansas City 2, at most 3 times a year. And despite that, she ended up living 12 years.
wow.
And I feel that had we been able to work more consistently rather than just a few times a year, but at least once a month, have that consistency, I think we could have kept her going that much longer. And even her son took me out to lunch after his mother passed and said, my sister and I want to thank you because we know we wouldn't have had our mother all this time had you not been working with her.
Wow. Uh,
Yeah. And
that's a beautiful story. It's a beautiful story. And it's also, you're bringing this up, and it's an important piece of healing that when I began with you, I didn't realize either how the consistency of doing work is so important. I remember going to a workshop once, it was some kind of healing workshop a number of years ago, and this woman was talking. She had gone to some, obviously very powerful indigenous healer. She had experienced a tremendous amount of sexual trauma in
mhm,
her childhood. And she went to this healer and said, look, I want you to take my pain away, just take it away. And obviously, he had the capabilities to do so. But in that process, the woman kind of lost her mind. She was destabilized by the situation, and
mm,
had to go off and live in the desert for a year. And mm, at that
wow,
workshop, a number of years later, she was still not very altogether.
mm,
Um, and so it's important for people to realize that no matter how gifted of a healer that they're working with, this process of continuing, of 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 continuing with the healing process along the way, because you can't undo patterns that have been in place for decades. It takes time, and it takes attention. The supportive, the forces in the healing come in and speed up the process, but we're still only human.
Right.
There's still, um like, no matter how powerful of a healer you are, it's not all going to go away in one day. um
Definitely.
you would go crazy. We identify so much with our pain, with our trauma, that if it was taken away all in one day, it wouldn't be responsible for a healer to do that to you, and nor would it be healthy or functional for you, which is why it's a continual basis. I know in the early days, it was only, every 4 months or so, I think I'd come back. I did a couple of really close together ones. But in the 10 years that I've known you, it's been a rather, like, I don't know, 2 to 4 times a year at least, on a regular basis. Because, and even, a lot of things were below the level of my consciousness. Like, I wouldn't feel how gunked up I was getting, how much the stress was in my body, how much unresolved trauma stuff I still had. Would get through session and I'd feel so much lighter. I'd feel like weights were lifted off me. And uh, it was just amazing to me, because a lot of times I didn't think, I thought I had gotten to a level of healing that was pretty good. And then when go through session, I'm like, wow, all that was still there.
Mhm.
And it's such a very, very important part that I don't think people realize. And the other piece is, people think, prior to working with you, I had had some fibroid surgery, and even many decades ago, how expensive it was. I had insurance, but it didn't cover everything.
Mhm.
And, I ended up having to pay that off over a couple of years, that hospital bill. And to me, spending money on these deep level healings, has kept me, like, out, it's kept my emotional health and physical health way more tuned up and on par. And, people have no problem making a payment to a hospital thing, but they won't invest in the future of their healing by maintaining regular sessions, because it's
Mhm.
too expensive, or they come up with this when, um and that was a piece that really hit me. It said, wow, I have to shell all this out to a hospital, which, thank goodness the emergency services were there, because it was an emergency situation. But it could have been prevented by a lot of self-care,
Mhm.
and some other, dietary, and other things. So it's a very, very big testament to maintain regular sessions, whether you think you need them or not. Um,
Mhm.
People would be amazed, um, to do that.
Yeah, it's people fail to realize that, if you think about the amount of stress that you go through in one day's time or a week, and you multiply that by all the days, weeks, months, and years that you lived, many of us suffer terribly. Some people had great childhoods, but many of us did not. We suffered a lot of trauma. We went through periods of intense hardship. We've Many people have gone through disastrous marriages or even just relationships and suffered as a result of um, breakup and just all kinds of things, and the stresses of working at jobs that we don't like. We're
Mm,
doing things we don't want to do. And so we internalize all that stress, and there's And it just accumulates in people's bodies over the years. And so again, there's that tendency to, there's also what factors into it is that now that we have, and I see an enormous change in people. Going back into the 90s, for instance, people were actually more self-aware. They were more aware of their bodies, of their emotions. But the fact that we have these like handheld computers, smartphones, and we're spending all this time on Instagram and TikTok and constant news updates and text, and it continually pulls us out of our bodies. Our focus goes into our devices. And so we're more numbed, we're more disconnected. And it changes the neural structure of the brain and the biochemical makeup of the brain. It's continually firing off that brain's dopamine reward mechanism. It uh, precipitates that reward-seeking behavior. So it keeps us skittering along the surface of reality. And so as that happens, it discourages the deeper, more intuitive and reflective, introspective kinds of processes. And so it makes it harder and harder for people to be in touch with what's going on deep within their bodies, within their minds. And so I can work with people, but there's all this digital interference from the devices and all of the online content that people
Mhm.
are continually ingesting. And so that pulls people away from their bodies. People disconnect from their inner core being. They lose that self-awareness. And so it's so much easier for people to be less aware, to be more disconnected,
Mm.
out of touch years ago. And for centuries, thousands of years, well, we could self-medicate with food and tobacco, smoking. Guess you didn't have tobacco in Europe, like over 500 years ago, but you did have booze. And
Mhm.
so, but for thousands of years, people have been drinking to self-medicate and but there are so many means through which people distract themselves. And it's at this time in history, it is more than ever before. And we don't realize that the technology, many people are just not aware of the impact that it has upon our brain, our mind, our bodies, and the disconnect. And so again, less awareness, but
But they are aware of they're having this disconnection, which they may not be aware of, but they are aware of of the effects it's having on their relationships. They can't get into relationships
yeah.
with people, their relationships with themselves.
Mhm.
I know when I spend too much screen time, I get really depressed, and it's terrible. Even
Yeah.
just like a day of it, is too much. So it's another important factor for people to, when you engage in those healing sessions, when you are held accountable. Oh, sessions coming up. I better do practice. How many times I
Yeah.
went through that over the years, that it holds you accountable to be in touch with your body, to get in relationship with those feelings, with the stress, with all of that, so you can live a more richly full um, life. I have a quote that, well, one of your, and you probably haven't heard this, and I won't say who it's from because they didn't give me permission. Because we've probably been a bit of time now. Um, it meaning your healing session moved mountains of heartache well enough for me to stay more fully engaged and connected.
Hmm.
And I thought that it captured your healings so well. Moved
Hmm.
mountains. Uh, that's the power in these sessions, but also the sense of groundedness. Um, uh, I always feel more connected to myself and the earth coming out of sessions. Well, maybe not right out of session, but within a day or two. Um, that I thought it was a beautiful quote that really captures your healing sessions, because they're powerful and they're grounding, and they really work.
There's something I want to add in that's important here is that there's a combination of things that are happening within people's bodies that, you know, everything from poor diet, that the foods that we're ingesting and they're not really nourishing our bodies. Our bodies tend to break down over time with age. The fact that many of us are not as physically active as we need to be. So there's that component. There's the historical emotional wounding that we carry, many things going back to childhood, even previous a previous marriage or relationship or different periods of our lives that we've gone through a lot of struggle, a lot of difficulty. There's a lot of that will come up. We hold that in our body. And even though we're not currently going through those experiences, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's gone away. It's a lot of that stress, a lot of that emotion is still trapped in our bodies from different everything from childhood and other periods of our lives that we've gone through. And it still can cause organs and systems to break down or not function very well. We have the immediate stresses, difficult, challenging issues, situations we're dealing with. That is having a profound impact on our bodies. And on our own, that's not being addressed. It's not correcting that. The body doesn't heal itself. It's just the body just kind of slides downwards into, there's this breaking down because of the stress. And again, people are not processing that on their own. But our the body and mind does have an innate healing intelligence, but because of the profound disconnect that many people experience, that healing intelligence is so compromised. And the fact that we spend all this time on our devices, our smartphones and computers, we're ingesting all this digital content, Instagram and Facebook and constant news updates and all that. It's overloading our body mind's processing capacity. So it's just this deluge. It's just throwing just buckets of just more just sensory input into
Mm,
our systems. And so with that, there's the disconnect, there's the numbing, the altering of our brain's biochemistry and neurostructure. It impedes our ability to process. And and then people are less self-aware. And so with all these things happening, this is why it is more important than ever before, the commitment and the consistency, that where people are like, oh, I'm cool, everything's fine. It's like, really? You're that out of touch? You're that
mm,
lacking in awareness? Because I feel in people's bodies, I feel the noise, the static, the stagnation that's all building up in and all around their bodies, that residual of all that unprocessed, undigested, the digital input, There's all those impressions of that, all that noise, that static, there's all their emotional content that's not being processed, all the stress. There's the physical toxin from the poor diets, the medication, the alcohol, the
Mm,
cigarettes, the pot, all these things. Body's breaking down, the body's innate healing intelligence is so compromised. And so as I work with people, as I have you do the practices, it re-engages your body and mind's innate healing intelligence. And then when we do the sessions, and I work with you individually, it's that profound presence that works through me goes in. And it's taken all that digital input, all that backlog of emotion that you haven't processed, the physical toxin, well, it's purging your body of the toxin, the digital garbage, the physical toxins from the poor diet, medications, and all that. And then it's taking those life experiences and all that subsequent emotional responses that you haven't digested, that you're carrying in your body. It's transmuting that content, and it's taking you into a deep dreamlike state so that you could thoroughly digest those experiences, those life experiences, lived experiences, and your subsequent emotional responses. And so you come out the other side and that all that's transformed so that it becomes fuel for growth. And whereas that stagnant emotional content before, it's just sitting in your body and it's just stagnant, it's heavy, it's deadened, it's like a poison to your system. It's like parts of yourself unintegrated and they're split off and works against you. Sometimes it operates out of different neural tracks within the brain, different thought processes and all that. But it's taking all that as it's being transformed, transmuted, and you integrate this so it becomes a functional part of you. There's more of you here. And if the more that's here, you're in alignment, you have more resources, more bandwidth, more capability. And so you become more highly functional.
yeah.
So it's that transformation and also that presence working through me, those forces, those beings going in to do the regenerative work on the physical level to facilitate the healing. Whereas somebody is struggling with the digestive disorders or they're injured in an automobile accident, sports injuries, just a wide range of other physiological health related issues.
Mm, mm. Um, I did want to, backtrack a little bit on one thing before we kind of wrap up here.
Sure.
Is that you brought up the woman that you worked with who was in psychotherapy for 10 years and um finally those things were surfacing when in the session that you did
Mhm.
rather than in the psychotherapy. And I I can't stress enough why it's important to work with you, to
Mhm.
work with somebody who has your capacities. Again, not trashing people, but I know that you've brought up in the past stories of people who go to these like shamanic soul retrieval journey, whatevers, and this kind of thing can happen, and they have no tools. The people that are facilitating this don't have the power and capacity to work with these situations. And that's why it's so imperative uh, with your training that you have, with
Mhm.
the decades, the thousands of people that you've worked with, that you have the capacity, the intuition, the empathy, and the power to work through and help people, in these, physical situations, emotional situations, and whatever, whatever they have going on there. Um, I is I didn't have anything else that is there anything else that you would like to add?
Just to add to that, there's a lot of people that can go through these pseudo shamanism workshops. It's become, sadly, it's become very commonplace these days.
It's
And
the new Reiki.
yeah, and yet and again, my intention's not to put down people. I feel that people are, for the most part, doing the best they can with the knowledge or understanding they possess. But what many fail to grasp is that there are traditions of healers around the world, and that the indigenous healers, you know, if you do have the opportunity to work with some of the indigenous healers that you would find in, say, from different parts of South America or from Malaysia, Indonesia, some of these other indigenous cultures, that there's transmissions of power that are passed down. Again, like I can't speak for every tradition, but what I can say is in my own background, in order to become a traditional native doctor, healer, you would apprentice from one of the older doctors towards the end of his or her life. He or she would transmit a portion of their or all of their own healing gift to you. And then you would go through the vision quest to earn the right to work with these gifts or healing powers. And again, the vision quest, it's pretty intense. I mean, there's some variation among the different tribes, but typically something like 4 days and nights, no food, no water, alone in the power. Uh, wait, no food, no water, alone in the mountains. But this presence, these beings would come to you and they start working through you. And it's very rare for people to have access to these. It's not something that people just happen upon. It's just very, very rare for people at this time in history. There used to be many among the Native American tribes because it was a very common practice. Young men and women, or even as they got older, they would continue, they would go to the mountain for the 4 days and nights and going through the vision quest. Often repeatedly, they would receive these gifts of healing. But in this day and age, it's just very, very few people go through these practices. And I would so much like to see more people develop these gifts. But in order to do so, it's not something you're going to ever get through a 3 weekend workshop, master healer sort of thing. It's just not going to happen. And you're not going to get it through some soul retrieval shamanism retreat. It's
Yeah, so a
it,
2 hour workshop.
It's an intensive one-on-one mentorship. You develop a relationship with one of these indigenous healer doctors, and he or she you will go through years of intensive training with them. And if you're truly committed to developing to the highest levels and being the best traditional doctor healer you can be, you'll do like I do. As I said, I've gone through dozens of vision quests. I've been going back so many years now. And even between vision quests, I generally do averaging a good 2 hours of meditation a day. And
Mm.
I'll do additional Qigong practice. I do a lot of practice. It's like a lot of the Indian yogis, the
And you're,
those who attain mastery in the
yeah.
internal martial arts, Taoist martial arts practices like Xin Yi Quan, Baguazhang, they would be doing hours and hours of internal practice. And so these are not things you can get through a couple of workshops, and it's not something you're going to get from one of these weekend master healers or someone who's gone through some cheesy ass shamanism retreat. I mean, this is just like a whole different level, whole different realm of healing transformation. There are really good people out there in the world, and unfortunately, there's just a lot of mediocre garbage, and the truly exceptional gifted healers are more few and far between, and there needs to be one needs to develop a certain literacy, like they talk about media literacy. A lot of people are easily manipulated, and kind of intellectually they're lazy, and so having trained in hypnosis, neuro-linguistic programming, and studying persuasion, cults, mind control, that as a growing up in a cult, I need to have understanding as part of my healing journey too. But but the fact is, a lot of people lack this media literacy, and so they easily buy into the narratives, simplistic narratives that are spun for them, and they're easily manipulated. But also when it comes to healing, there's a certain literacy that one needs to develop so that one has the understanding and to the awareness to distinguish the difference between a lot of the fluffy, foo-foo, superficial garbage that's out there and the truly powerful. And no, I'm not in any way saying I'm the only one. I mean, there's if you search out, you could find some very powerful healers in different parts of South America. Again, places like Malaysia, Philippines, Indonesia. There's, and some of these healers have some amazingly profound gifts. Some lack the understanding. For instance, in our modern day, in the mental health field, I know a lot of psychiatrists lean too heavily into prescribing medications, but there are those who don't. And then there are psychotherapists that have gained profound understanding into the emotional wounding. And there's a tremendous insight that we can gain from that. And so the fact that I've also studied psychology and having to understand my own emotional wounding. And I mentioned the woman that I worked with who recovered those memories and when she was molested and physically assaulted as well as a child. And having so many individuals come to me with histories of childhood physical, emotional, sexual trauma, I had to understand what I was dealing with. And so it's like combining, just bringing in, just gaining from all these different sources. And so having to continually educate myself to learn more. One of my favorite quotes is, I think Ram Dass, that spiritual teacher, was the one who originally said this. Maybe he got it from somewhere else, but he said, the more I learn, the more I realize I have yet to know. And I live by that because
Yeah,
I'm continually learning. And again, that's part of the reason I continue to go back to the mountain, to continue to go on the vision quest, because there's no end. And even within the Taoist traditions, like these masters, those who attain mastery, day after day, they would be doing hours of intensive practice, continuing to evolve to higher and higher levels. And so one is never done.
it's
It's
true.
yeah,
It's true,
it's the
definitely.
question for me is like, well, how far can I go? How much more can I become?
I do think with people, sometimes they think that feeling good is healing. and that's what makes it difficult, because they don't want to experience memories or feelings or what's under there. But that is where the true healing is. And in dealing with those difficult things and those difficult emotions, we actually expand our ability to be happy, because we're not utilizing all that energy holding on to all that stuff. You know, it it's, I know you don't put yourself out there like as a meditation teacher, but you know, it's and I approached you through the healing process, but I certainly can see how you and your work, your healing, could help those people on the meditation path, because invariably when you meditate deeper and long enough, stuff comes up.
Mhm.
And has anybody approached you in that direction, from that direction, not from a healing way, but to help them through meditation, the difficulties in their meditation?
They do, but they usually end up working with me too,
Yeah, good.
because it's there's a certain amount we can do for ourselves. For instance, with meditation practice, but we all need intervention too. Like as I said, most days I do a good 2 hours of meditation, and yet I will come up against my own limitations. It's like, okay, I need to get my ass back to the mountain
Mm,
because, again, we can do a certain amount ourselves, but then when we come up against our limitations, then we need that intervention to facilitate the healing that we cannot fully do on our own.
mm, mm. So how can how can people get a hold of you? How would you like people to reach you? Um,
Best ways you can, one, you can check out my website, which is my name, benoofana.com. Again, Ben Oofana, BENOOFANA.com. So that you can check out my website. I have a link where you can book a call with me. And now that's mainly set up for people dealing with relationship issues. If they're in the midst of a breakup or divorce, they're dealing with patterns of abandonment, unrequited love. And that's just refiningrelationship.com, REFINING, and then relationship, you know how to spell that, .com.
I
If
can
you
share
don't have,
this.
if you're
I
not dealing with breakup or divorce or some relationship blowing up on you, you can still use that link. You could just go in there and you could, when you fill in the blanks, you could just write a note to me and say, I'm not dealing with relationship issues. I got this health issue, or I'm struggling with anxiety or depression. I'd still like to talk with you. And so you can get in touch with me that way. You can book time on my Calendly. Or if you go to my website, there's if you look on in the contact section where it says contact, you can just message me and you could call my Google Voice number. What is that? 332-333-5155. The reason I'm giving Google Voice is because if I give my cell phone number, I'll get inundated with even more spam calls. So the Google Voice again, 332-333-5155. You can leave a message and I will call you back. And if by some chance you don't hear from me, just continue. Message again, email, message through my website, whatever, because I do respond. Sometimes technology fails, but as long as I do receive your message, I
and
will respond to you.
can put those links below the video, wherever you're watching it, whether it's on YouTube or social media. And I would put it in an addendum in there. I remember the first time calling you and remembering the feeling of like we had been friends, like it was so easy to talk to you. So
Mhm.
I encourage people to call and make an appointment, click on the links and check them out. Um, and you can click on my links as well. I have a woman's healing circle. It's woman with an A, healingcircle.com. You can check that out as well. Ben, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a pleasure as always, and it's getting time to schedule a healing in a, in a little bit. It's been a while, but thank you so much.
Sure, you're welcome. I very much enjoyed engaging with you, and I appreciate the fact that since we have worked together all this time, you're much more tuned in and you had more of a sense of the questions to ask me instead of from coming way out in some left field or wherever out there. It's that you knew what to ask me so
Yes,
that I could bring out and really communicate what needs to be communicated.
yeah, I think I have a video too on your channel of years ago when you did some an interview for of me with the work. But yeah, definitely the work has
Evolved.
evolved, and it's a pleasure. And thank you so much. So,
Sure. You're very welcome. Thank you. Mhm. Exactly.